Henry Jones of 5464 South Elm said that 10 o'clock a.m. she was shaking her dust mop out of her bedroom window when she saw a flying saucer. Or, Henry Armstrong was driving between Grundy Center and Rhinebeck last night when he saw a light. Henry thinks it was a flying saucer. This is not a good UFO report. This type of UFO report, if it was received by Project Blue Book, was stamped insufficient data for evaluation and dropped into the dead file where it became a mere statistic. Next to the insufficient data file was a file marked CP. This meant crackpot. Into this file went all reports from people who had talked with flying saucer crews, who had inspected flying saucers that had landed in the United States, who had ridden in flying saucers, or who were members of flying saucer crews. By Project Blue Book standards, these were not good UFO reports either. But here is a good UFO report with an unknown conclusion. On July 24, 1952, two Air Force colonels, flying a B-25, took off from Hamilton Air Force Base near San Francisco for Colorado Springs, Colorado. The day was clear, not a cloud in the sky. The colonels had crossed the Sierra Nevada between Sacramento and Reno and were flying east at 11,000 feet on Green 3, the aerial highway to Salt Lake City. At 3:40 p.m., they were over the Carson Sink area of Nevada when one of the colonels noticed three objects ahead of them and a little to their right. The objects looked like three F-86s flying a tight V formation. If they were F-86s, they should have been lower, according to civil air regulations. But on a clear day, some pilots don't watch their altitude too closely. In a matter of seconds, the three aircraft were close enough to the B-25 to be clearly seen. They were not F-86s. They were three bright silver delta wing craft with no tails and no pilot's canopies. The only thing that broke the sharply defined, clean upper surface of the triangular wing was a definite ridge that ran from the nose to the tail. In another second, the three deltas made a slight left bank and shot by the B-25 at terrific speed. The colonels estimated that the speed was at least 3 times that of an F-86. They got a good look at the three deltas as the unusual craft passed within 400 to 800 yards of the B-25. When they landed at Colorado Springs, the two colonels called the intelligence people at Air Defense Command Headquarters to make a UFO report. The suggestion was offered that they might have seen three F-86s. The colonels promptly replied that if the objects had been F-86s, they would have easily been recognized as such. The colonels knew what F-86s looked like. Air Defense Command relayed the report to Project Blue Book. An investigation was started at once. Flight Service, which clears all military aircraft flights, was contacted and asked about the location of aircraft near the Carson Sink area at 3:40 p.m. They had no record of the presence of aircraft in that area. Since the colonels had mentioned delta wing aircraft, and both the Air Force and the Navy had a few of this type, we double-checked. The Navy's deltas were all on the East Coast, at least all of the silver ones were. A few deltas painted the traditional Navy blue were on the West Coast, but not near Carson Sink. The Air Force's one delta was temporarily grounded. Since balloons once in a while can appear to have an odd shape, all balloon flights were checked, big 100-foot diameter research balloons. Nothing was found. A quick check on the two colonels revealed that both of them were command pilots and that each had several thousand hours of flying time. They were stationed at the Pentagon. Their highly classified assignments were such that they would be in a position to recognize anything that the United States knows to be flying anywhere in the world. Both men had friends who had seen flying saucers at some time, but both had openly voiced their skepticism. Now, from what the colonel said when they were interviewed after landing at Colorado Springs, they had changed their opinions. Nobody knows what the two colonels saw over Carson Sink. However, it is always possible to speculate. Maybe they just thought they were close enough to the three objects to see them plainly. The objects might have been three F-86s. Maybe Flight Service lost the records. It could be that the three F-86s had taken off to fly in the local area of their base, but had decided to do some illegal sightseeing. Flight Service would have no record of a flight like this. Maybe both of the colonels had hallucinations. There is a certain mathematical probability that any one of the above speculative answers is correct for this one case. If you try this type of speculation on hundreds of sightings with unknown answers, the probability that the speculative answers are correct rapidly approaches zero. Maybe the colonels actually did see what they thought they did, a type of craft completely foreign to them. Another good UFO report provides an incident in which there is hardly room for any speculation of this type. The conclusion is more simply unknown, period. On January 20th, 1952, at 7:20 in the evening, two master sergeants, both intelligence specialists, were walking down a street on the Fairchild Air Force Base close to Spokane, Washington. Suddenly, both men noticed a large, bluish-white, spherical-shaped object approaching from the east. They stopped and watched the object carefully, because several of these UFOs had been reported by pilots from the airbase over the past few months. The sergeants had written up the reports on these earlier sightings. The object was traveling at a moderately fast speed on a horizontal path. As it passed to the north of their position and disappeared in the west, the sergeants noticed that it had a long blue tail. At no time did they hear any sound. They noted certain landmarks that the object had crossed and estimated the time taken in passing these landmarks. The next day, they went out and measured the angles between these landmarks in order to include them in their report. When we got the report at ATIC, our first reaction was that the master sergeants had seen a large meteor. From the evidence I had written off as meteors all previous similar UFO reports from this air base. The sergeant's report, however, contained one bit of information that completely changed the previous picture. At the time of the sighting, there had been a solid 6,000-foot thick overcast at 4,700 feet, and meteors don't go that low. A few quick calculations gave a rather fantastic answer. If the object was just at the base of the clouds, it would have been 10,000 feet from the two observers and traveling 1,400 miles per hour. But regardless of the speed, the story was still fantastic. The object was no jet airplane because there was no sound. It was not a searchlight because there were none in the airbase. It was not an automobile spotlight because a spotlight will not produce the type of light the sergeants described. As a double check, however, both men were questioned on this point. They stated firmly that they had seen hundreds of searchlights and spotlights playing on clouds, and that this was not what they saw. Beyond these limited possibilities, the sergeant's UFO discourages fruitful speculation. The object remains unidentified. The UFO reports made by the two colonels and the two master sergeants are typical of hundreds of other good UFO reports which carry the verdict, "Conclusion unknown." Some of these UFO reports have been publicized, but many have not. Very little information pertaining to UFOs was withheld from the press, if the press knew of the occurrence of specific sightings. Our policy on releasing information was to answer only direct questions from the press. If the press didn't know about a given UFO incident, they naturally couldn't ask questions about it. Consequently, such stories were never released. In other instances, when the particulars of a UFO sighting were released, they were only the bare facts about what was reported. Any additional information that might have been developed during later investigations and analyses was not released. There is a great deal of interest in UFOs, and the interest shows no signs of diminishing. Since the first flying saucer skipped across the sky in the summer of 1947, thousands of words on this subject have appeared in every newspaper and most magazines in the United States. During a 6-month period in 1952 alone, 148 of the nation's leading newspapers carried a total of over 16,000 items about flying saucers. During July 1952, reports of flying saucers sighted over Washington, D.C. cheated the Democratic National Convention out of precious headline space. The subject of flying saucers, which has generated more unscientific behavior than any other topic of modern time, professional scientific societies, causing scientific tempers to flare where unemotional objectivity is supposed to reign supreme. Yet these thousands of written words and millions of spoken words, all attesting to the general interest, have generated more heat than light. Out of this avalanche of print and talk, the full, factual, true story of UFOs has emerged only on rare occasions. The general public, for its interest in UFOs, has been paid off in misinformation. Many civilian groups must have sensed this, for while I was chief of Project Blue Book, I had dozens of requests to speak on the subject of UFOs. These civilian requests had to be turned down because of security regulations. I did give many official briefings, however, behind closed doors, to certain groups associated with the government, all of them upon request. The subject of UFOs was added to a regular series of intelligence briefings given to students at the Air Force's Command and Staff School and to classes at the Air Force's Intelligence School. I gave briefings to the technical staff at the Atomic Energy Commission's Los Alamos laboratory, where the first atomic bomb was built. The theater where this briefing took place wouldn't hold all of the people who tried to get in, so the briefing was recorded and replayed many times. The same thing happened at AEC's Sandia base near Albuquerque. Many groups in the Pentagon and the Office of Naval Research requested UFO briefings. Civilian groups, made up of some of the nation's top scientists and industrialists and formed to study special military problems, worked in a UFO briefing. Top Air Force commanders were given periodic briefings. Every briefing I gave was followed by a discussion that lasted anywhere from 1 to 4 hours. In addition to these, Project Blue Book published a classified monthly report on UFO activity. Requests to be put on distribution for this report were so numerous that the distribution had to be